ei muutu tätä. Ma teeks niimoodi, täida meestrid kohad ära. Kui oli mingi teine üle, või noh, oli koodis selles jah, seda võite ka teha.
Aga no mul on
vabandust, korra tähelepanu, et kui me küsime küsimusi, tõstke käsi üles, meil on mikker, mille me siis anname teile, et need, kes laitavad, on kuulatud ka küsimusi, muidu nad ei tee konteksti ära. Et eriti veel, kuna meil on inglise kasutatud, siis kontekst on.
küsimused ka inglise keeles.
Ei nagu Silver, sa küsi ise küsimus selles mõttes, et kui keegi tahabki küsida, siis läheb küsima ära ja sa küsid ise mikrofoni.
I can try to repeat the question as well in English if it's easier to, so that my microphone picks it up, and maybe we can do it. And if I talk too quickly, just, wave at me and I'll try to slow it down a bit. If there's some words I use that you don't understand, so it's gonna be fine. All right. My name is Matthias. Hello. Really nice to be here. Was there anyone who attended last, was it spring when I was here doing the running? No? Okay, hopefully somebody has seen the material that we created from the running session. But my job at Asics, I'm based in Finland, and I'm in charge of product training in Finland and then the Baltic countries as well. Finland is covering the sales to the Baltic countries, so everything that we do comes from our office in Helsinki, or in Espoo actually. But yeah, I'm here today to talk about the indoor shoes. So there's 4 indoor shoes in the Rademar lineup, and then 2 padel shoes, and we're gonna cover them all. And not only that, but we're basically gonna try to help you understand why it's super important for us to sell indoor shoes for indoor sports and not running shoes, for example, for padel players, because that's something we see a lot, and I would want us to try to get away from basically having people playing the wrong shoes. So if we look at what Asics is all about, it's all about providing the right instruments and gear for people to do sports. It doesn't really matter what sport it is or what the goal is. It can be a marathon, it can be just playing handball or volleyball or something. But Asics is there to help you, or the player, to be able to do it and enjoy it as much as possible. This has been the goal all along, and by moving, people feel healthier both physically and mentally. That's basically the Asics vision about everything. When we create a shoe, there's 4 different topics that we look at. So we look at the athlete. So there's always a goal with a shoe, for example, or a piece of gear, a shirt. But in shoes, we look at what the shoe is supposed to do. So there's a clear goal with one shoe. Do we want to help you run faster? That's a clear example, right? We want to create a faster shoe. We want to create a more comfortable shoe, for example. Or then when it comes to indoor, we want to create a shoe that's maybe cushioning since you're jumping a lot, that's comfortable to play with, and it holds up to a lot of quick movements. There's always a clear goal. The shoe is made for a specific purpose. And then, of course, we come into biomechanics. We're looking at how people are actually moving, what's happening in the foot. And then we understand, okay, if we do this shoe a bit more supported on the outside, it's going to hold up to a lot of pressure coming when we're stopping and braking and turning, for example. So specific purpose, and then biomechanics, and then of course a lot of testing goes into it. So there's usually a 1-year program in basically making a new update for one model. If it's a completely new model, then there's usually about 2 years of prototyping and testing out the shoe before we're actually ready to launch it. Every single time we update the shoe, there needs to be a certain amount of parameters that we actually feel that this shoe is now better than the last one. If we're not comfortable, we're not going to launch it at all. Usually we get updates for the key top models, we get updates once a year. So some of the shoes we update in the spring, and some of the shoes we update in the fall. So you probably see that, for example, on the running side, all the neutral shoes get updated every spring, and all the stability shoes get updated during the fall season. Same goes for indoor. Some of them spring, some of them fall. And then one big topic nowadays is sustainability. And sustainability, of course, I don't know if you've noticed, those of you who have been working for a while, our shoe boxes used to be blue, right? They're not blue anymore. So even small details like we're not coloring all the boxes leads into sustainability, that we're not using water and colors anymore that much. So we have brown boxes, normal boxes, without painting them. And if we look at the shoes, so the key shoes nowadays tend to have more and more recycled materials in the upper. That's sort of the first step. In running shoes, we already have about 80%. In some of the indoor shoes, we have 20%, but we're getting there since these are a bit more technical to make, since they need to be a bit more stiff and sturdy. We're not there yet. And now in the running side, we already get recycled materials in the midsole as well. So we're getting there first with running, and then hopefully soon with the indoor shoes as well. And you can help us out with the sustainability piece. So for example, what I started off with, we need consumers to be playing and running in the right shoes. It's not a sustainable product if we use the product, it's the wrong size and we use it in the wrong setting. For example, we use a running shoe in the padel court. That's not a sustainable way to go because it's going to break down. It's not meant for that purpose. It's not going to hold up for that long, which means it's not sustainable. So that's where you can actually help us, making sure that the shoe is correct for that user, for that purpose, and then that it fits, because that's going to have a longer life cycle when a person is using the shoe. So that's really, really cool if you could help us out with the sustainability piece as well. When we actually take a look at the differences between running shoes and indoor shoes, the first thing, if we start from the bottom, so the first thing is that usually a running shoe, it's a lot more sort of stiff in the corner. So this stops, and then the rubber stops, and then it's immediately the midsole. And these indoor shoes usually have slightly more rounded edges, and the rubber sort of covers the corner. And this is important because if it's too sharp, the corner of the shoe, it's going to be easier for the foot, the ankle, to roll over. If it's a bit more rounded, there's a bit softer, technically, the edge, which means that you have a bit more control over the edge when you're braking and turning. So the big problem with running shoes is that they're meant to go forward. They're not meant to do anything else. They're meant to be comfortable, maybe fast, bouncy, short cushioning as well. They're super comfortable, but they're meant to go forward. There's no stiffness in them. The upper, for example, is super soft, but if you start going side to side, there's nothing actually holding your foot in place compared to a good indoor shoe, right? So really important, the rubber here is covering the corner so that when you actually press outside, all of the midsole isn't actually getting pressed outwards, and the same goes for the foot inside the shoe. So there's actually the upper holding in place the foot in the indoor shoes, while there's nothing like that in the running shoes. So super important to sort of understand this different, and this is one of the main reasons we are actually selling indoor for indoor and running for running. Those are the main topics. If we look at running biomechanics, we know that when a person is stepping down, we're placing, depending on the pace and the technique, but we're placing, let's say, 2.5 times body weight on one foot. In indoor, in tennis, for example, when the professionals are playing, we can place 7 times more pressure on the foot. That's a lot of weight if you think about me weighing 90 kilos, for example, times 2, times 7. That's a lot of kilos going into one motion like this. So there's a huge amount of pressure that goes in. So that's really, if you are at a high level, you're playing at a high level, you're using the shoes a lot, please use the better products, the best products that you have in the lineup. So here's where the actual upselling comes in. So the shoes that are higher up in price cost a bit more, but there's more technicalities in the shoe. So the shoe is going to be better because there's more of the really detailed materials in it that actually is there to support you. So the biggest difference usually when you look at a high-end shoe and then a padel shoe, for example, high-end and a padel shoe at slightly cheaper price, the upper, for example, is a big difference. So this is a bit softer. It might be a bit more breathable for some people, but this again is a bit more stiff, since higher-end players are going to be moving faster on the court. So, of course, they need a shoe that's a bit more supportive, right? Makes sense? Yep, cool. Like this. At Asics, when we are actually looking at indoor shoes, we're talking indoor now, so all ball sports, we're talking volleyball, floorball, handball, you name it. We're not dividing the shoes per genre like that. So we're not saying that this is a volleyball shoe and this is a handball shoe. That's the old way of looking at things. We're actually looking at the movement patterns and what type of shoe a user might use and might benefit from. So instead of saying that, hey, all volleyball players needs to use this shoe, we're saying that, hey, if you're jumping a lot, this might be a good shoe for you. But we know that in volleyball you might have the libero players and the setters as well. They're not jumping as much. So they might benefit from a different type of shoe, a bit more quicker, right? So instead of saying that, hey, per sport we're dividing shoes, we're actually dividing them per movement pattern. So we have 3 different groups. We have higher, we have stronger, and we have faster. So the higher shoes are for the jumping sports. So volleyball is a good example of that. They're usually a bit more cushioned, and then they might have some supportive elements. That's basically the plastic here that's stopping the foot from rolling, for example, in the wrong direction, but then giving it a bit more stiffness to actually push up in the jump. And then, of course, when we're landing, they're a bit more cushioned. And then in the stronger section, I don't think Rademar has a stronger shoe in their lineup, but usually you see that they have some support on the outside. So especially for those sports that we turn and break a lot, those are a bit more stable and they're really good for those sports. So handball with the big strong players is a good example. And then you of course have the faster segment. And in the faster segment, it's all about being as quick as possible on the court. So usually they're a bit more flexible, and they might have a different sort of look on this twist truss or truss stick that we have in here. So the same idea goes that we don't want to twist the ankle the wrong way, but we want to be able to sort of have the stiffness, but still the flexibility to be as fast as possible on the court. And with these, you usually tend to feel like you're a bit closer to the ground as well, which means you're a bit quicker on your feet. So higher, stronger, faster. And in your case, it's higher and faster, right? Makes sense. And then, of course, if you find a player that plays floorball or whatever, and they want a higher shoe, it's not wrong. It might be a bit more cushioned, technically meant for jumping, but for a heavier player, it might feel nice to have a bit more cushioning underneath your foot. That's totally fine. So ask the customer, what type of shoe do you like? You can ask them what's your movement pattern, but it might be a bit difficult for them to say, I move in, I don't know, circles. I don't know what the movement pattern is, but they might know at least what type of shoe they're looking for, what type of aspects they like in the shoe, and then you can try to find a shoe like that. But of course, it's easier if they're playing volleyball, then a higher shoe is the first step to take and try that on. And when you have an idea of what the customer might like, it's your job to force the customer to try the shoe. We need to get people to try the shoe. That's your easiest way to upsell a product. So for example, if you want them to buy a higher price point, a more expensive shoe, the easiest way to do that is to force them to try on the shoe. The more we get shoes on feet of people, the easier it's going to be for us to sell premium products. That's just how it is. Because the premium products should feel better. It should be, especially if we get them moving in the shoe. You do have enough room in the store to actually try the shoe, and that's also one way to make sure that the shoe fits like it should. So they need to do some movements in the shoe to make sure that the foot is actually sitting inside the shoe like it should be. So for example, if it's the right size, the heel should be in place. The heels should not be able to move that much inside the shoe. That's really important because that's basically number one if we're talking about fit of a shoe. Really great. When we're looking at the actual shoes, so let's take higher first. So your shoe in the higher department is the Gel Task. So like I said, slightly more cushioning, especially in the heel. Then you have this Trustic, this piece of plastic here. That's supposed to give it some rigidity to basically the jumping movement. So it's a bit more stiff thanks to the plastic here, which makes it easier to transfer the energy when you're stepping forward and you want to transfer it up. There's some stiffness that's helping you push off. And then at the same time, it's easier to twist the shoe this way than it is this way, which is good for your foot. You don't want to twist it sort of the wrong way, but you should be able to turn inwards, for example. So that's the Gel Task. And then of course, always a balance between breathability and support. So in the shoes you see that you have a mesh upper in most of the shoes. And then you have some, we're talking about supportive overlays. You use whatever word you like, but it means that it's a bit more stiff. And this is what's actually making it a bit more stiff in the upper than a running shoe. And that's actually then supporting the foot because like I said, there's a lot of power going into the movement and the foot. If we go down in price from the Gel Task, we have Up Court, and this is like an entry-level shoe. Technically it fits in the higher category, but when we go down enough in price point, the lines get a bit blurry. So it's not that important to understand that this is a Up Court up. It's a higher shoe, but it doesn't have all the elements that the higher price points have. So this is a really good entry-level shoe for pretty much any sport. So quite the same thing. The actual rubber is the same. You don't have that much cushioning in it, and the mesh overlays are actually pretty much the same, but it's not that cushioned and it's not that supportive. It's a bit more flexible, but the flexibility means that it could be fine for another sport. Again, it's closer to a faster shoe than the Gel Task, for example. So that's the Up Court, really good at entry level. When we go into the faster segment, the best shoe we have in the faster segment is the Netburner Ballistic. So the Netburner Ballistic is all about speed. So this actually has a higher drop. Everybody's familiar with the concept of drop. So how high the heel is compared to the forefoot. And in running, usually the faster shoes have a lower drop, right? But in indoor, with a higher drop, 15 millimeters, it means that you're basically pushing the body a bit further up on your toes, which means that you're quicker to get moving. Otherwise, it's supposed to be quite flexible, even though it looks a bit big, but it's super flexible in the forefoot, but you still get the support and the cushioning in the heel. So that's the point with the Netburner Ballistic. And here you actually see the high-end upper that's really stiff. It might not actually be as breathable as the other products, but it is better when you start moving faster, when you need more from the shoe, then this is always going to be a bit better for you. And you have this shoe now in the MT version, and MT means that it's basically higher. So this shoe comes in the normal version, and then you have the MT version, which means it's a couple of centimeters higher here in the collar. Some people like that, especially volleyball players. they might feel that they have a bit more support. Even basketball players, usually those shoes are a bit higher up in the collar, which means that you might feel that the ankle is a bit more stable if you then actually use the laces all the way up here. So that's the MT version. You might find next season, I can't remember what you have bought in, but you might find another shoe in the MT version. It's the same shoe, it's just a bit higher in the collar. So don't worry if it says MT. But that's the Netburner 3, and here you see that it's a bit more curved here, and usually that's for when you actually need to turn and start backing up and making those turns. And especially when we go into the high-end jumping shoes, you might have this version as well, since you're stepping in, rolling over the heel and then jumping up. So by curving the backside of the shoe, that's a really good thing, because it's easier to transfer the energy from coming forward into going up. But yeah, Netburner Ballistic, that's technically the best shoe we have in the faster segment, but especially in this version, totally fine for basketball, volleyball, you name it. Really good shoe. And then you have the Court Hunter underneath the Netburner Ballistic, once again, a faster shoe. So here you see that it's a bit more breathable, but it's not that stable since it has more of a mesh upper. And then you have the same thing here. So this is called a twist truss. So supposed to be flexible in this way, but not that flexible in this way. So the same thing that you had in the Netburner Ballistic, there might be some millimeters that's off, but technically it's doing the same thing. But this is slightly lower in the drop, which means that you get a bit lower on the court, might feel a bit bit more stiff. You might feel a bit closer to the ground with this shoe. It's a bit more simple in the construction in a way. So this is a really good shoe if you want a normal, quick, easy shoe. Really good one, this Court Hunter. We sell this quite a lot in Finland for example, floorball and things like that. Questions about these? Good. One thing that I might mention is the sole of the shoe. So if we look at these shoes, you might have a couple of different options. For example, like this. So like I said, always rounded in the corner so that the rubber is actually covering the corner. But then in the high-end shoes, you might find these lines. So these are called X guidance grooves. And it's all about making sure that even though it's rubber, and you need quite a lot of rubber in it, it's flexible. Which means it's easier to run and turn in this shoe. It needs to be flexible in this way, but it needs also to be flexible in different directions, so that when I'm not pushing off straight, I'm pushing off to the side. It can be flexible to allow me to push off, but still have contact area with the ground, so that you have basically friction against the floor. So that's why we have the X groove in some of the shoes. Questions about the Netburner Ballistic or the other indoor shoes? The padel shoes are coming up, so don't worry. Everything clear? If you don't remember the specific models, don't worry about it. It's totally fine. Just understand the sort of who are we selling what type of shoe for. Question?
Kui sa tahad sisetoestusega jalatsid, siis kas see ülemine kõrgem sobib ka? Hea küsimus, kuidas? Sa oskaksid seda inglise keeles ka öelda või?
If I need arch support, then it's good. Do I need anything?
Well, technically we don't do arch support like we used to. So not even in running shoes, you don't really see arch support as much as you used to do. So the shoes from the inside, they don't have that much of the actual sort of, yeah, usually. Because nowadays how we do support has changed during the last year. So if you look at the Kayano, for example, that's a good example. Yeah. So in running shoes, we do supportive shoes still, but actual arch support that actually is pushing up to sort of hold up the arch, we don't do that on the inside as much as we used to do like back in the days. So if you have a foot that's not basically fitting inside the shoe, the shoe shape is a bit different, then the insole is a really good example to make sure that the fit of the shoe is perfect. So that's, in my opinion, that's the best thing with insoles, is that we can make sure that the shoe is actually customized, the fit. The shoe is supposed to be supportive in a way, but the fit and the actual arch support doesn't really exist since there's so many different options for it. So that's sort of how we're looking, and the same technically goes for running almost. I think I answered the question. Yeah. Then the next part is the padel shoes. So the big difference now, if we're looking at, once again, we can look at running shoes. They look like this in the bottom. And then we had indoor shoes. They might look like this. And then we have padel shoes. They look like this. So the big difference here is that in padel, the courts are artificial grass with a bit of sand, right? When padel was a new sport, they had a lot of sand on them, like a lot of sand. And that's tricky, since the sand is basically rolling on the surface, and then your shoe is on that rolling. So it's slippery if you have a flat shoe. So that's why the first padel shoes we created had this herringbone construction, which meant that basically it was possible for you to slide, but when you're actually lifting the foot, it's dropping all the sand that's in between here. That's the big point. It's the same as tennis on clay surface or on artificial grass. But then they started to create new padel courts, and nowadays they don't put as much sand on the padel courts as they used to in the beginning. So that's why we felt it's too grippy if it has the herringbone construction here. So we created this hybrid sole. You might find it in some shoes, and then you might find the old herringbone construction in some shoes. So once again, the high-end products have this sole, and then our technically less pricey options might have this older herringbone construction, but super grippy, since this is coming from the tennis world. But this is now the hybrid sole, which means that it's even better on all types of surfaces. The padel shoes technically look like tennis shoes. So it's the same as our tennis lineup, but the sole is a bit different. So the movement patterns are the same. In padel, you have two different movement patterns. You have the people that stay on the back court. And on the back court, of course, they're a bit more defensive. They don't go up to the net as much. You're moving side to side a bit more, which of course means that the hits, when you're hitting the ball, it's a bit longer. It's not the short, quick movements at the net. You're further back, moving more side to side. And then you have the other playing style, which is more of a attacking player that goes up to the net, more of a fast player. And those players benefit more from the flexible shoes. So in your lineup, you actually have the control player with this shoe. It's wider in the base. It's a bit more stiff on the outside to be able to cope with the side-to-side movements. And once again, wider means it's more stable. And then you have the faster player, the speed players that go up to the net a lot, which has a more flexible shoe that's easier to sort of twist and go up to the net. It's the same for tennis. So padel tennis, technically the same aspects go. You have two different playing styles, like you had 3 different playing styles in indoor. But the big difference to tennis is then the movement pattern. So usually in tennis, when a person goes up to the net, the point usually ends, right? Somebody wins the point. Or then once in a while you see Roger Federer do a behind the legs shot, but that's rare. In padel, it's totally normal for a person to go up to the net 5 times and back during one point. So that's why we have the same construction here that you had in the indoor, since it's easier to turn with this shoe. And the same with this ball here, it's called a pivot point, which means even though the shoe is grippy, it's easier to twist around in the shoe. Since in padel you go up to the net, then you have to run back to get the ball from the back glass, and you might go up again. So that's the big difference between tennis and padel. So it's a bit more flexible in the outsole. It's easier to turn with this shoe. Otherwise, you might see in this shoe, you see the same things that you saw in the faster products. You have the twist truss. You have the sort of the divided sole like this, so it's flexible and fast. While in this you have a bit more control, bit more side support in the control typed shoe. So you have two good options depending again on the playing style of the person, right? Makes sense. Questions about that? Here you see that it's a different price point. So even though these fit in different sort of segments, since it's a different price point, in this shoe you have the bit more stiff upper, and in this you have a bit more breathable upper. But it's dependent on sort of the type of player. We've seen that 66, almost 70% of users playing, or padel players who actually play padel once a week or more, are actually more of a speed type player. But if you're a recreational player, or if your playing style is just a bit sort of more defensive, then the control player is sort of a good option for you. Or if you want a more breathable, bit wider fit in the shoe, then the gel dedicate is a really good option for you. Make sense? Questions? No? No. Yeah, like I said, you don't have to remember all the different details. I hope that I'm able to give you sort of an understanding of the differences and how to sort of start thinking about it, instead of saying that, hey, this shoe has flight foam here. It doesn't really matter. It's a midsole, it's super good. But understand sort of what type of shoe you should be selling to what type of consumer, and that person will then be happier with your service. When you can actually explain to that person that, yes, super good shoe for this type of movement, and this shoe is a bit more flexible, or this shoe is a bit more sort of stable, for example, and that consumer is then understanding and realizing the same thing as they're trying out the shoe. Instead of starting to drop that this weighs 269 grams, it doesn't really matter. So that's sort of my look at how we should be doing things, and then we're going to have better fits for the consumers coming into the store. I think I covered the most important topics. Now I'm super happy if you have any questions. If you don't, then that means it was super clear and everything was really nice. Was it clear? You got something out of it. Good. Really good. Really good. Thank you. Thank you. It means it's clear. I'm gonna stay around, so if you want to sort of after the recording, it's totally fine. And then when you realize you have questions later, just send them to Silver and we're gonna tackle them with an email or something. Cool. Thank you very much.
Need tooteid on võrreldes jooksuga poole vähem, ongi palju meil tooteid oli 6. Aga kui ongi küsimusi